Hey everybody, welcome back to Race of History. Today we're going to get into the Sabaton history for 82nd all the way. I have another Sabaton song that I'm working on. I'm hoping to get it out this afternoon. It'll probably depend. We've got some pretty bad weather here, so I'm hoping that everything stays up and running and I don't have any issues with anything to try to get another video out this afternoon. Also, I am working to quickly get out the first movie reaction for The Big Short. I'm almost finished with it. I'm hoping to get it out very soon. I ran into a little bit of a snag editing part of it, but it's almost finished, so I'm hoping to get it out soon. But for today, we're going to start with Alvin York, Sabaton history. Let's get into it.
I'm Indy Nidell.
And I'm Joaquin from Sabaton, and this is Sabaton history.
Yeah. The American 82nd Division was formed during World War I and was known as the All-American Division.
And our song, 82nd All the Way, is about that division and Sergeant Alvin York.
For the poor of the United States in the 19-teens, life was tough everywhere. But deep in the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee, where people lived in small communities, distrusted outsiders, and carried guns and knives wherever they went, violence was omnipresent. Growing up as an impoverished farmer's boy there, Alvin York was used to the harsh environment, where people would solve their social tensions or take out their frustrations by drinking, gambling, and brawling. He was no exception, but in 1915, he forsook his violent past and dedicated his life to the Church of...
So I'm somebody who I've always lived in Texas, which obviously that's in the south of the U.S. Compared to what it is now, I honestly can't imagine 100 years ago. Like I can't imagine just with the way society was at that time and the laxed rules and things like that and laws and law enforcement, it's kind of wild to think about.
Christ. Fast forward 2 years. News of America's entry into the World War reached the little mountain community slowly, and it was not until early June 1917 that the call came to register for the draft. York sent his draft card back, having written on it, "I don't want to fight," and even wrote a letter explaining his religious beliefs that wouldn't allow him to join the war. But the draft board rejected his letter, arguing that the Bible was kind of open to interpretation, and war was a big part of it anyhow. York was left with no choice, and was sent to join the 82nd Division for basic training in February 1918.
I'm curious what you guys think about that. What do you guys think about, the whole idea of the draft in general, but also the making somebody fight who is religiously or principally against killing? Like, what do you guys think about that? Do you think that it's wartime and nobody really wants to go, but you need soldiers? Do you think that should be off limits? I'm curious what you all think about that.
Today, the 82nd is famous for its deeds as an airborne division in the Second World War. But back in 1918, they called it the All-American Division, made up of men from all over the states. At first, it had been Southerners like York, but soon the division was filled with men who were considered too troublesome or unruly for other divisions. Many of them recent immigrants from Europe who hadn't been in the country long enough to speak proper English. York was not very popular with the others because of his rigid religious beliefs, especially not with his superiors. But he did what he was told, and that was good enough. He was a natural soldier and a remarkable marksman.
In the draft of 1917, a man from Tennessee.
I'm sure he was a good shooter. That's kind of the name of the game down here.
By September 1918, York and the 82nd were in France and had taken part in the Saint-Mihiel offensive. They now prepared to join the great Allied counteroffensive that was to break the German positions in the Argonne Forest. On October 3rd, near the ruins of the village of Varennes en Argonne, they marched out. French artillery batteries were shelling the forest, though, and were unknowingly hitting their own troops trapped there. There were even rumors of a lost battalion of men that was surrounded and about to be wiped out in those woods. The American public was waiting for such a story. The big press agencies wanted eyewitness stories from the reporters, and there was a lust for sensation among the public back home, which knew little of the war in Europe and hungered for news and first-hand accounts. For the reporters, it mattered little whether the story was about a hero or was a tragedy. Either made good headlines. But no one could have guessed they were so close to the two biggest American stories of the war. It did not take long for York's battalion to find the enemy. As the doughboys surged forward, they were hit by heavy fire from machine guns and mortars from a place identified as Hill 223. This was a major German position, and York's men were to cover the flank as the hill was taken. But as they were about to mop up resistance in the woods, a German counterattack struck, driving them back up the hill, where a ferocious battle for the crest was fought. The Americans prevailed, but York found himself standing at the top of a hill, surrounded by the dead and wounded. Sleep did not come easy after that, but York sought refuge in the Bible. Through shells of death with all their agitation, thou wilt protect me if I will only trust in thy grace. Bless thy holy name.
Into war he broke through things so long, a rifle and his slave. Joined the ranks of some private assigned to 338.
The night of October 8th, as the Lost Battalion, who are also the subject of a Sabaton song, and who we've already done an episode about, had finally been found and the survivors were leaving the forest, it was York's turn to move back in. It was not until the early morning that they were back at Hill 223. The German shells were falling again. Under heavy gas attacks and mortar fire, panic began to rise. But panic is best fought off by action. Bayonets first, they rushed into the woods. York's platoon was cut in half by a German machine gun, and the survivors broke off the attack. Despite the terror, York rallied his squad and moved through the thick undergrowth and thorny bushes in an attempt to outflank the enemy position. But the forest was a maze, and the squad soon lost all sense of direction. As they emerged from the next line of bushes, they encountered two German medical orderlies. After a shared moment of disbelief, the Germans bolted. York's men, cursing and firing, gave chase. Running through the woods and thick bushes, they unknowingly went deep into German territory. Having lost the German medics, they emerged in a small clearing with dozens of German soldiers in front of them, chatting or having a meal. A lot of them were shirtless, but as they noticed the Americans with their menacing rifles and bayonets, they threw everything to the ground, threw up their hands into the air. York and his men, greatly outnumbered by their new prisoners, were about to search them when they were spotted by a German machine gun nest. They must have been overzealous bastards because they began firing into the crowd, hitting friend and foe alike. In the chaos of bullets and screams, York's best friend in the battalion was hit and went down in a pool of blood. That was it. The mild-mannered, God-fearing, Bible-reading Alvin York simply snapped, and anger and fury took over as everyone...
These stories of the... how do I put this? There's not a bunch of them, but there's a handful of kind of like brave, stoic, just by the by, do what you have to get by soldiers who, because of a shelling or a surprise attack or something, reach this like boiling over point and do crazy things, right? Crazy things. Some of them do crazy things in a terrible way where they'll, run into enemy fire and get mown down, or they'll run into a shell, or they'll, but you see these stories of these soldiers who break and instantly are like, okay, I'm going to do something. And they either end up really, really badly, or they end up, kind of awesome.
Everyone else scrambled for their lives. York dashed forward, rifle in hand. He pushed up the hill, circling around the machine gun nest until he was atop a ridge overlooking the German position. York raised his rifle and pulled the trigger. One by one, the Germans went down. York killed them without mercy, but with extraordinary precision until the machine gun was silenced and 19 dead Germans lay around it. As York took a moment to survey his work, another group of Germans burst from the bushes, bayonets first. Caught off guard, York dropped his rifle and drew his .45 pistol. After shooting the leader from just a few feet away, he kept on killing and killing. Dead Germans lay all around him, and all went silent.
Man.
The German lieutenant slowly got up, his hands raised. York kept the pistol aimed at the man's head. In a strong German accent, the officer tremblingly said, "If you stop shooting, I will make them give up." York kept his finger on the trigger, staring like death himself into the eyes of the German, ready to end his existence at any moment. Slowly, the German officer took a whistle out of his pocket, blew into it, and then yelled an order towards the bushes behind him. One after the other, German soldiers began appearing from behind the trees and bushes. So did the remaining Americans who had finally caught up with York. Seeing his men, York calmed down for a moment, but then a German soldier threw a hand grenade into the crowd. He missed York. York did not miss him, shooting the man dead on the spot. The other Germans offered no resistance.
On that day, Alvin York entered the fray, saving the day, 82nd all the way.
They began leading the column of prisoners back down the way they came, guarding them warily as they were clearly outnumbered. They made their way through the maze of woods, and another German platoon crossed their paths. But they were exhausted and astonished by the situation, and they gave up. A short while after that, they encountered yet another group of Germans who raised their weapons ready to shoot. Only York, pressing his pistol in the back of the German lieutenant, convinced him to think again. And all of them, except for one young German soldier clinging to his rifle, dropped their weapons. York shot the boy dead without hesitation. The column continued. Finally, out of the woods, they marched to Hill 223, where perplexed American soldiers stood and watched the spectacle of 132 arriving German prisoners captured by York and a handful of doughboys. The story spread among the men, but the American journalists were, for the most part, busy copying the reports coming from the Lost Battalion, and the newly promoted Sergeant York remained unknown to the American public for quite a while.
Imagine that you are at Hill 223. You're one of the American soldiers. You basically are, I guess, considering that York and his men probably died, or if they didn't die, they are like lost in the woods. And then to see, like, what would you even think to see them walk out with that many German prisoners? Like, I feel like that it like wouldn't even fit into my brain. I would be like, wait, what in the hell happened? Like, what? Were they all sleeping? Like, what? How is this possible?
York was proud of his deeds. He did, in fact, do what he was told, and he did it well. The war itself, however, remained a mystery to him, and he could not make sense of all the carnage and destruction. In the days after the battle, he walked the forest, accompanying medics and stretcher bearers, looking for survivors among the dead. Where did God fit into all of this? Who was to live and who was to die? Mere chance or God's will? Did someone guide his hands in this? It was not until April 26, 1919, over half a year later, when the Saturday Evening Post published York's story through a journalist that had heard of him in France a few months earlier. Basically overnight, Alvin York became one of the biggest American heroes ever. He was seen as all-American, as a warrior monk who answered the call to come to America's aid. When York arrived back in the States on May 22nd, he, like the men of the Lost Battalion before him, was greeted with a hero's welcome and was paraded through the streets. Newspapers, magazines, newsreels spread his story far and wide, and he did paid speaking engagements telling his story wherever he went. He received dozens of medals, some from France and Italy, and even the American Congressional Medal of Honor. Money was not an issue anymore, at least for the moment, but York refused many offers from businesses that tried to profit from his fame through advertising. Instead, he would soon return to rural Tennessee and buy a farm, and even open up a Bible school to educate the local youth. Still, though, the thoughts of that fateful day would keep him awake for many nights in his life.
That's what I was going to ask. What do you guys think you would like that reception home? Because I feel like I probably wouldn't. I feel like even that, and it's not even me, it's him, even that bothered me. It just, something about it rubs me the wrong way. About having this guy go over and fight in the most brutal conflict known to man. He's done and seen horrible things, and then he comes back and there's a parade and everybody's trying to, pay him to do this and do that, and all these stories are about him. I feel like I would not like that. I would feel like that whatever this was, whatever this whole thing was that I returned to, was some sort of like facade or charade. Like that this wasn't real. What was real was what happened over there, and this is some kind of dream bubble that you guys are all living in, and I don't really want to be a part of it.
Once he had forsworn violence and given his life to God and the peaceful teachings of his Christianity. He never wanted to go to war. And once he was there, among all the death and destruction, the war had brought back a side of him that he very much wanted to forget, and he would struggle with that for the rest of his life.
Into the fires of hell they are gone, not hero to be. Enter the wall from over the sea.
So, 82nd All the Way. This is a song from your new album.
Yes, The Great
It's pretty
War.
exciting, The Great War. Well, what about the All-American Division? What was it that grabbed you about it? Was it Sergeant York, or was it the division itself? Or when you were looking at The Great War and thinking, okay, we've got to write a whole bunch of songs about this war, how did you choose just this specific topic?
Oh, specific topics. Man, it feels like for every Sabaton song we make, there are 10 stories we have to leave untold because
Okay.
they match. They don't really match. And with this one, it was really hard to find a story that matched the music in such a good way. Because, it's a catchy song. It's
Yeah.
upbeat. And, at least the image in my mind of the Great War is not very cheerful. You know?
No.
So we needed something heroic to celebrate there. And when me and Per were writing the lyrics, it's one of those times when things flow smoothly.
Okay.
It very, very rarely does. When me and Per are writing lyrics, we are always, well, not arguing in a bad way, but we're always, working at everything from every angle. Everyone is playing devil's advocate at the same time, trying to get the best out of it and how to approach the song, from which direction, how do we connect it emotionally with the music, lyrically,
Right.
and getting all of those things together. It's usually quite of a struggle, but not in this case. It just came naturally.
Now, you're presumably going to be playing all these songs from the Great War live, or at least a bunch of them when you're touring. How are you going to decide which ones you really want to play live? Are there going to be some that are just not going to be done live? Or are you going to alternate things? Because you're going to obviously want to play a bunch of your hits and a bunch of popular favorites when
Absolutely. In the end, that's up to you guys. You should let us know, because we're going to start out now as, with a bit of a tour going on here. We can choose a few songs and see how it works. But if they don't work out, of course we're going to change the set list.
Sure.
In most cases, we can predict a few songs that are going to be popular.
Especially for specific countries. Obviously.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, on every album, we are totally mistaken about 2 or 3 songs.
Yeah.
So in the end, it's up to the fans and you guys which songs are on the set list.
All right. Well, that is 82nd All the Way, and this was Sabaton History.
18 all the way from Tennessee into 123.
All right, everyone, that's it for today. And you know the drill. Playlist right there. Patreon, World War II, Time Ghost. See you soon. I dance great. Become Patreon.
Okay, so that was 82nd All the Way, Alvin York story by Sabaton History. Yeah, that's a really good one. There's the Lost Battalion is a really good story. The 82nd has a very long, rich history in the U.S. military. So this was a good one. This is a good time period. There's a lot of stuff happening here, but I definitely understand the idea that it may be hard to match something like the Great War with songs that are faster or more upbeat, or because it's just I guess I'd never really thought about that, but they really are trying to match the topic with what it musically should sound like. And oh my God, I feel like that would be so hard. Yeah, I feel like that would be so hard. Anyway, that's a good one. I'm going to try to get another one out, a song this evening off of the Carolus Rex album. So be on the lookout for that. As always, help me keep building the channel over here. Like, comment, subscribe. I appreciate all the support. I will see you all next time.